There is a town in the very east of Estonia. It's called Sillamäe, and at first glance it looks like a normal coastal town. There's a beautiful beach promenade with steps leading down to the sea, surrounded by old buildings. There are shopping centers, restaurants, and even a cinema. But Sillamäe is actually something very special, because just 35 years ago I would never have set foot in this town. To be more precise, I probably wouldn't even have known that Sillamäe existed. This town you see right here, this beautiful town, wasn't on any map. There were not even postal addresses for it. The existence of Sillamäe and what was done here was, for years, a closely guarded secret. The reason for this secrecy: in Sillamäe for decades uranium was enriched for the Soviet Union and also to build nuclear weapons. All that happened until the year 1989, and only after 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Sillamäe lost its status as a closed city and can now be visited normally again. What I would really like to know is, how do you actually do that? How do you manage a city that nobody is supposed to know about? How did the people live here back then? And what relics from this time can still be found here? Well, let's take a little walk through Sillamäe and let's find out. Okay, here we are. Welcome to Sillamäe. Well, this is not really Sillamäe, this is just a boring parking space. But I thought, before we talk about the history and the life in this former closed city, let's try to find some relics from that time. And this is actually the perfect place to do that. Well, I'm standing here in an industrial area on the outskirts of Sillamäe. And if we just walk a few meters down the road, we will already come across the first relic from this strange time when Sillamäe used to be a secret town. Namely, this abandoned building. As you can see here, classic Soviet architecture. I'm no expert in architecture, but I believe the term for this style is Soviet modernism. And what you can also see here, time has pretty much stood still. I tried to find out what exactly this building was back then, and online you will find a whole range of explanations. One blog calls it an administrative building, while a forum claims it was once a swimming pool. But a real estate company that tried to sell this building a few years ago actually posted some photos of the interior, and from what you can see there, it looks more like it was used for textile production or something like that. There are still looms and similar equipment left inside. According to that company, the building was apparently constructed in 1989, so just before the collapse of the Soviet Union and just before what was going on in Sillamäe became public knowledge. What perhaps is even more interesting is what we will find on the other side of the road. According to several sources, this is actually a production hall linked to the local uranium industry. And if you look closely at the facade, you can still make out some letters. The Russian phrase Miru Mir, which means peace to the world. This whole uranium enrichment facility here was known as Combine Number 7. Around 18,000 people are said to have been involved in building this complex, mostly prisoners and soldiers. And once it became operational, it's believed that this factory also processed the uranium used in the Soviet Union's first atomic bomb, though that's never been definitively proven. At the time, this entire operation was so secret that any information about it was strictly forbidden. Also, other relics in this area likely belonged to this complex. This railway track with the little guardhouse here, for example, or these beautiful restored buildings over here. Nowadays, a company called Sillamäe operates here, extracting rare earth elements, but more on that later. And there's another relic I would have liked to show you, but unfortunately visitors can't just go there. Somewhere on this industrial site there is a massive pond, 1 kilometer long and half a kilometer wide. And this pond is here because the Soviets back then did not deal that carefully with all the radioactive material. At that time, the uranium plant basically had no safety standards. There are reports of radioactive objects being stored in crates or even in break rooms, and also workers had no proper protection. And as for all the nuclear waste, well, that was simply dumped into this open-air pond, which was surrounded only by a stone wall. A total of 12 tons of radioactive waste ended up in there, and it's still quietly emitting radiation to this day. In 1989, the newspaper The New Scientist wrote about hair loss in children in Sillamäe and named nuclear waste as the most likely cause. It wasn't until 2008 that things were finally brought under control. That's when the EU funded a concrete sarcophagus for the atomic pond. This whole operation cost 21 million euros. Well, and then it's also worth taking a little trip into Sillamäe's town center, which you already saw in the beginning. Today, as you can see, it's a lovely place full of historical buildings and colorful flower beds, but even here you will still find a few hints of the town's secret past. This statue of Prometheus, for example, holding up a giant atom. It represents the Soviet ideal of the muscular worker, and back in the day it stood on the grounds of the uranium facility, hidden from the public view, of course, because everything was meant to be secret. Today, though, you can find it right here on the central square of the town. There's also plenty of Soviet architecture still standing. The town hall, for instance, which looks like a church, or the cultural center, which back in the day not only had a concert hall, but also a nuclear bunker. And also these grand steps down to the sea were built during this era. And well, then there's also this monument right here. Another reminder of Soviet times in Sillamäe. It honors the Soviet army, depicting a soldier, a pilot and a sailor. And today there is actually a lot of controversial discussions about this monument, but more on that also later in the video. So you see, even though Sillamäe today might look like an ordinary town at the coast, if you take a second look, you will uncover a lot of traces of a time that actually no one should have known about. Okay, now we've seen a bit of Sillamäe and its relics from the past, and I think now it's time to talk about the life in this town during Soviet times. What is it like to live in a town that's closed but also secret? Well, to find out, we have to go back to a time shortly after Second World War. At this time, Sillamäe is a village on the edge of the abyss. Once, around 2,600 people lived here, but during the war, Sillamäe witnesses unspeakable atrocities. The Nazis set up the largest concentration camp in Estonia just next to Sillamäe, in the village of Viivikonna, a so-called transit camp. The prisoners at that time are forced to toil for 11 hours a day in the oil shale factory, fueling the Nazi war machine. But in 1944, as Soviet troops draw near, the camp is evacuated. And when the Soviets finally march into Sillamäe, all they find are the ruins of the village and the old shale plant. The place is completely deserted. And at this point, Stalin wipes Sillamäe off the map. But only officially, because in the following years, the city is rapidly built up and expanded. At that time, Stalin is on the hunt for uranium, but natural uranium deposits in Russia itself are scarce. And suddenly, the tiny village of Sillamäe comes into the Kremlin's sights. As it turns out, uranium can be extracted from the region's natural oil shale. So, the new town of Sillamäe is built. Everything is entirely planned from scratch. There are plenty of columns, ornate decorations on the buildings, and everything is washed in a warm yellow color. Sillamäe becomes a charming little garden city. And why all this effort? Well, the Soviet authorities want the new engineers and scientists brought in to handle the uranium business to feel as comfortable as possible. Others are not so fortunate. As I already mentioned in the beginning, many of the people who worked in the uranium plant itself didn't do that voluntarily. Among them are prisoners and inmates from the Soviet gulags. And also the region's original Estonian population suffers. As in many other towns across the Baltics following Soviet annexation, they are displaced and replaced with Russian citizens. By 1959, around 8,000 people live in Sillamäe, but only 174 of them are Estonian. During the post-war times, the city offers its residents a high level of comfort. There are luxury goods and a lot of entertainment and stuff like that. Everybody should be happy and productive. However, behind this perfect facade, the residents have to struggle with a lot of problems. Everything in Sillamäe is under scrutiny. Every new worker at the factory is checked for ideology and loyalty, and Soviet propaganda is found at every street corner. And the town itself, at this time, is like a golden cage. For example, all communication at that time, including within the factories, runs through codes and ciphers. Uranium, for example, is a forbidden word, not to be spoken under any circumstance. The same goes for the name Sillamäe itself. Speaking of the town can land you 3 years in prison. Taking photographs of the city is also strictly forbidden, and anyone wishing to send post to Sillamäe finds they officially can't. Letters must be addressed to Leningrad 1 or Narva 2. Anyone hoping to invite the family for Christmas has little chance. To enter Sillamäe, one can only do so by the invitation of the factory, the military, or the government. Outside the town borders, there are checkpoints, barbed wire, and watchtowers. Without permission, there is no entry, but also no exit. Living and working in Sillamäe operates under the motto, the carrot and the stick. Those who stand out at the factory, those who work overtime, who push themselves the hardest, are honored as a sort of employee of the month and are added to the book of the best. Some even find their names displayed on a board next to the town's cultural house. At the same time, however, there is also a shame board for those who have broken the regime's rules. What happened to them is still unclear to this day. At least, Sillamäe is not entirely isolated when it comes to information. When the weather allows, the residents can receive Finnish or Swedish television, so they get at least a glimpse of what is happening in the outside world. Already in the year 1952, it becomes clear that the uranium extraction here in the city is actually too inefficient for the long term. But since the factory is built and the whole city around it is already built, a lot of uranium is carried from other places into Sillamäe and is processed here. However, this is also the time when the luxury in the town slowly fades and the life gets harder. The newer buildings in the town no longer have fancy, ornate facades. Instead, the Kremlin increasingly orders the construction of cheap panel buildings. This contrast between the golden days of Sillamäe and its gradual decline can still clearly be seen today when you walk through the streets here. In the year 1987, the uranium activities here in Sillamäe are slowly coming to an end. The United States and the Soviet Union sign an disarmament treaty, which also has consequences for the city of Sillamäe. Over time, the former uranium plant takes a new role. Engineers and scientists begin experimenting with rare earth elements at combine number 7, and this continues even after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Today, the former uranium plant is the largest processor of rare earth elements in Europe. However, the scale of the old uranium plant is no longer the same. After the end of the atomic plants, countless workers were laid off. In 1989, around 20,000 people still lived in Sillamäe, but by the latest census in 2017, the number had dropped to just 13,000. Today, more than 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, life here in Sillamäe, of course, is not comparable anymore with the situation back then. Today, the city is not secret anymore, and of course, the people can live freely here. However, the traces of that time are still visible. And I don't just mean buildings and monuments. The majority of Sillamäe's population remained Russian, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that's still the case today. That means Sillamäe is grappling with its own identity. It's neither fully Estonian nor fully Russian. It's something unique in between, something that developed over decades of isolation. Exhibitions, public debates, and local initiatives frequently focus on the town's history. And, as I mentioned earlier, there are also ongoing discussions around monuments like this one. Many people view these kinds of statues as a glorification of the Soviets' occupation of Estonia and are calling for their removal. The Russian war against Ukraine has only intensified this debate. In the nearby town of Narva, which I already covered in another video, a number of such monuments have already been taken down. Even though the era of Soviet occupation and Sillamäe's time as a secret city ended nearly 35 years ago, its legacy still echoes today. So, that was my video about Sillamäe. I hope you liked it, I hope you learned something. If you did, please leave a thumbs up, and you can also hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any upcoming video. There's one more interesting thing right next to Sillamäe, about 15 minutes with the car. There is a ghost town called Viivikonna, which has also something to do with the oil industry in and around Sillamäe. The story behind this ghost town is not that interesting, to be honest, so I decided not to make a full video about it. But if you are a patron or a channel member, then you will get a short bonus video from this ghost town. So if you're interested in that, you can become a patron or a channel member. In the video description you will find all the links that you need for that. Patrons and channel members always get videos before everyone else, and also some exclusive stuff like this bonus video, for example. So that's it for today. I hope you liked my video, and I would say have a safe journey and see you next time.